A black elderly man skips his own birthday dinner to help a bleeding biker stranded in the rain. Everyone calls him crazy, because this biker isn't just any man. He's a tattooed ex-con with a past darker than the storm that night. But what starts as a small act of kindness turns into something no one saw coming. As they share one roof, old wounds reopen, because that biker carries a tattoo with a name the old man thought he'd never hear again. His late wife's name. Now, two broken souls, one searching for redemption, the other for purpose, are about to discover that miracles sometimes wear leather jackets. But when the town turns against them, and danger comes roaring back, can a single night of compassion rewrite a lifetime of regret, or will it destroy everything he has left? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Earl Winston's weathered hands traced the edges of the bright birthday card, his fingers lingering on his daughter Laverne's familiar handwriting. "Hope you're ready for the surprise dinner I'm definitely not planning tonight, Daddy," he read aloud, chuckling at her playful attempt at secrecy. The morning sunlight streamed through his kitchen window, catching the card's glittery surface and casting tiny rainbows across his worn tablecloth. He placed the card carefully on his refrigerator, securing it with a magnet shaped like a garden trowel, a gift from Laverne last Christmas. The quiet house wrapped around him like an old friend, comfortable in its stillness. After 75 years, he'd learned to appreciate these peaceful moments, even if they sometimes felt a touch too quiet since his wife's passing. The morning beckoned him outside to his small garden, where raised beds of vegetables stretched in neat rows. Earl adjusted his worn denim cap against the Mississippi sun and knelt carefully beside his tomato plants. His knees protested, they always did these days, but he ignored them, focusing instead on the familiar rhythm of gardening. "Well now," he murmured to a particularly stubborn weed, "you've made yourself right at home, haven't you?" His strong hands worked methodically, clearing space around the tender plants. The soil was warm beneath his fingers, rich with promise. He'd always found a special kind of peace in nurturing things, watching them grow from nothing into something beautiful and useful. By midday, the garden work complete, Earl settled on his back porch with his old work boots and a tin of leather oil. The boots had served him well for more years than he cared to count, and he believed in taking care of what you had. As he worked the oil into the leather with slow, circular motions, his mind wandered to memories of teaching his daughter the same lesson when she was young. "Things last when you treat them right," he'd always told her. Laverne would roll her eyes now if she heard him say it again, but she'd learned the lesson well. He smiled, thinking of how she maintained her nursing uniforms with the same careful attention he'd shown his carpentry tools all those years. The afternoon drew him to Rose Hill Cemetery, where he parked his old pickup truck in its usual spot. The groundskeeper waved as Earl made his way down the familiar path to Martha's grave, his steps sure despite the uneven ground. He'd brought fresh flowers, yellow daisies, her favorite. "Hello, sweetheart," he said softly, arranging the flowers in the small vase by her headstone. "Our girl's up to her usual tricks, planning another surprise she thinks I don't know about." He settled onto the small bench he'd installed himself, his voice gentle in the cemetery's peaceful quiet. 75 years, Martha. Remember when that seemed ancient to us?" He sat there for a while, sharing the day's small events with her as he always did. The breeze rustled through the nearby crepe myrtles, their pink blossoms drifting like confetti in the warm air. When the first distant rumble of thunder reached his ears, Earl knew it was time to head toward the restaurant where Laverne would be waiting. Dark clouds gathered quickly as he drove along the county road, the kind of sudden storm that Mississippi summers were famous for. The rain started as a gentle patter against his windshield, but soon grew heavy enough that he had to slow down, his wipers working overtime against the downpour. The road stretched empty before him, bordered by dense trees whose branches swayed in the strengthening wind. Earl leaned forward slightly, squinting through the rain-blurred glass. The old truck's headlights cut yellow paths through the growing darkness. That's when he saw it. A brief flicker of light through the rain, followed by a sound that made his heart jump. The screech of tires, then a crash that carried clearly even through the storm's noise. Earl's foot moved instinctively to the brake, slowing the truck as his eyes searched the roadside. About 50 yards ahead, barely visible through the curtain of rain, something reflected his headlights. Metal, twisted and steam hissing in the wet. A motorcycle lay on its side near a drainage ditch, one wheel still spinning slowly in the air. Earl's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He thought of Laverne waiting at the restaurant, probably checking her watch already. He thought of the warm, dry interior of the building, the birthday dinner his daughter had worked so hard to arrange. Then he thought of Martha, and what she would say if she knew he'd driven past someone who might need help. Lord, he sighed, already turning the wheel. Don't let me regret this. The truck's tires crunched on the wet gravel as he pulled onto the shoulder, his emergency flashers cutting bright paths through the rain. He reached for the flashlight he kept in his glove compartment, testing it quickly before opening his door. The rain hit him immediately, soaking through his shirt as he stepped down from the truck. His shoes sank slightly in the mud as he made his way towards the crash site, the beam of his flashlight revealing more details of the scene. The motorcycle had left a long skid mark on the asphalt, ending where it had apparently hit the ditch's edge and tumbled. Parts of the bike were scattered across several yards, and near the main wreckage, Earl's light found what he was looking for, and dreading. A figure slumped on the ground, not moving. Thunder rolled overhead as Earl moved carefully down the slight incline, his free hand reaching out to steady himself against the wet grass. The rain drummed against his shoulders, running down his neck as he approached the fallen rider. His heart beat a steady rhythm of concern and prayer as he drew closer, wondering what he would find, hoping he wasn't too late to help. The beam of his flashlight illuminated the scene fully now. The rider lay face down, one leg bent at an awkward angle. The person's leather jacket was torn along one sleeve, and a helmet, thank the Lord they'd been wearing one, had rolled a few feet away. Earl stopped at the edge of the ditch, water streaming down his face as he assessed the situation. Years of experience, both from his military service and just living a long life, told him to be cautious. But something else, that still small voice he'd learned to trust, urged him forward. He approached the figure slowly, speaking in a clear, calm voice that carried over the sound of the rain. "Hello there. I'm here to help. Can you hear me?" His flashlight beam steadied on the person's form as he waited for any response, his own breaths visible in the cooling air. The scene froze in that moment, Earl standing in the rain, his light holding steady, while around him the storm continued its assault on the Mississippi night. Behind him, his truck's hazard lights pulsed steadily, cutting through the darkness in regular, reassuring beats. He was already late for his birthday dinner, but as he stood there in the rain, Earl Winston knew he was exactly where he needed to be. The figure on the ground remained motionless, and Earl took another careful step forward, his shoes squelching in the mud. The rain continued to fall, washing away any traces of what might have caused the accident, but leaving Earl with the clear certainty that his evening, and perhaps his life, was about to take an unexpected turn. Earl moved closer to the fallen figure, rain pelting his shoulders as his flashlight beam revealed more details. The biker's body tensed, then shifted with a groan. Suddenly, the man pushed himself up on one elbow, cursing through clenched teeth. "Son of a..." The biker's voice was rough, pained. He tried to stand but stumbled, his right arm hanging awkwardly. Even in the dim light, Earl could see the dark stain spreading across the torn leather sleeve. "Easy there," Earl said, keeping his voice steady and calm. "That arm's bleeding pretty bad. Let me help you up." The biker's head snapped toward him, eyes narrow and suspicious beneath wet strands of dark hair. "Mind your business, old man," he snarled, though the effect was somewhat diminished by his obvious pain. He tried again to stand, this time managing to get to his feet, but swayed dangerously. Earl stepped closer, undeterred by the hostility. "Name's Earl Winston, and right now seems like you're making yourself my business. That arm needs attention, and this rain isn't helping matters." The biker laughed harshly. "What are you, some kind of good Samaritan?" He pressed his good hand against his injured arm, wincing. "Just someone who'd rather not have your death on his conscience." Earl gestured toward his truck. "I can take you to get help, or you can stand here bleeding in the rain. Your choice." For a long moment, the only sound was the drumming of rain and distant thunder. Finally, the biker's shoulders slumped slightly. "Chase," he muttered. "Name's Chase Rollins." The walk to Earl's truck was slow and careful, with Chase stumbling twice on the slick ground. Earl stayed close, ready to catch him if needed, though he suspected the younger man would rather fall face first in the mud than accept direct help. Inside the truck's cab, the silence grew thick and uncomfortable. Chase sat rigid in the passenger seat, water dripping from his leather jacket onto the upholstery. Earl turned the heater on full blast, hoping to cut through the chill that had settled over them both. "Let me guess," Chase said after a few minutes, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're one of those church folks, right? Gonna tell me Jesus led you to me?" Earl kept his eyes on the rain-slicked road. "Would it matter if I was?" "Ha!" Chase's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Knew it. Bet you're already planning how to save my soul, aren't you?" He shifted in his seat, grimacing. "Well, save your breath. I've heard it all before." Earl simply nodded and began to pray quietly, his voice barely audible above the engine and rain. Chase's response was a dramatic eye roll and a muttered comment about religious nuts. The lights of the small-town emergency room came into view, casting yellow reflections on the wet pavement. But as Earl turned into the parking lot, Chase suddenly straightened in his seat. "No," he said firmly. "Not here." Earl frowned. "That arm needs proper medical attention." Chase's face had taken on a haunted look. "They'll recognize me. There might be cops." His good hand gripped the door handle. "Either take me somewhere else or let me out here." Earl studied the younger man's face, noting the fear barely hidden behind the tough exterior. Against all better judgment, he put the truck back in drive. "My place isn't far," he said quietly. "We can at least clean that wound properly." The drive to Earl's house was punctuated only by the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers and Chase's occasional, sharp intake of breath when they hit a bump. Earl's mind wandered to the birthday dinner he was missing, to Laverne and the family waiting at the restaurant. His phone buzzed several times in his pocket, but he couldn't answer while driving in this weather. Earl's kitchen was bright and warm compared to the stormy darkness outside. Chase stood awkwardly by the sink, while Earl gathered first aid supplies from the bathroom. The younger man's tough facade had cracked slightly, exhaustion and pain showing clearly on his face. "Jacket off," Earl instructed, laying out bandages and antiseptic on the kitchen table. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Chase struggled out of the wet leather, revealing a nasty gash along his upper arm. Earl worked methodically, cleaning the wound while Chase hissed and swore under his breath. The injury looked painful, but not life-threatening, mainly road rash, and a deep cut that would heal with proper care. Earl's phone buzzed again, the 15th missed call from Laverne. He sighed heavily, knowing he'd have a lot of explaining to do. The birthday dinner was long over now, his family probably worried sick. "That should hold," he said, securing the last bandage. "Couch is through there. I'll get you a blanket." Chase stood in the living room, looking out of place and uncertain among Earl's comfortable, well-worn furniture. When Earl returned with a thick blanket, the younger man wouldn't meet his eyes. "Why are you doing this?" Chase asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Earl spread the blanket on the couch, smoothing it with careful hands. "Because it's what needed doing." He stepped back, suddenly feeling every one of his 75 years. "Get some rest. We'll figure out next steps in the morning." As he headed toward his bedroom, Earl paused in the doorway. Looking back at his unexpected guest, he murmured quietly to himself, "Happy birthday to me." The rain continued its steady drumming on the roof, nature's reminder that some nights don't go as planned, and some birthdays bring unexpected gifts. Earl Winston woke to the sound of cabinet doors opening and closing in his kitchen. For a moment, he lay still in his bed, disoriented, until memories of the previous night's rainy rescue flooded back. The digital clock on his nightstand showed 6:45 in the morning. He pulled on his robe and shuffled down the hallway. The hardwood floors creaked beneath his feet, announcing his approach. In the kitchen, Chase Rollins stood with his back turned, methodically opening and closing cabinets. His leather jacket hung over one of the kitchen chairs, revealing arms covered in tattoos. The bandage Earl had applied last night was spotted with dried blood. "Looking for something?" Earl asked, causing Chase to whirl around like a caught teenager. "Sorry," Chase muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Got hungry. Didn't want to wake you." Earl moved to the refrigerator. "Sit down. I'll make us some breakfast." Chase hesitated, then pulled out a chair. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Earl said, gathering ingredients. "But my mama taught me never to let anyone go hungry in my house." He pulled out a mixing bowl and began measuring flour. "How's that arm feeling?" "Been worse?" Chase shrugged, then winced at the movement. "Look, about last night. Thanks. I mean it." Earl nodded, cracking eggs into the bowl. "You like pancakes?" "Who doesn't like pancakes?" The kitchen filled with comfortable cooking sounds, the whisk against the bowl, butter sizzling in the cast iron pan, the soft pat of batter hitting hot metal. Earl worked with practiced movements, his mind drifting to countless Sunday mornings when Lila would be beside him, mixing fresh berries into the batter while humming gospel tunes. "Smells good," Chase said, breaking into Earl's thoughts. "Been a while since I had a real breakfast." "Where you been eating?" Earl asked, flipping a golden brown pancake. Chase's face closed slightly. "Here and there. Got out of somewhere bad a few months back. Been moving around since then." Earl set a plate stacked with pancakes in front of Chase, then got butter and syrup from the fridge. He poured 2 glasses of orange juice before sitting down with his own plate. "Sometimes moving around helps clear the head," Earl said carefully, watching Chase attack the pancakes like a starving man. "Sometimes it just postpones dealing with things." Chase paused mid-bite, then slowly set his fork down. "You always this philosophical at breakfast?" "Only when I'm trying to figure out why the Lord put a motorcycle crash in the middle of my birthday plans." That earned a small smile from Chase. "Sorry about ruining your birthday." "You didn't ruin anything," Earl said, cutting into his pancakes. "My wife Lila always said interruptions are just God's way of adjusting our schedule." His voice softened at mentioning her name. "She had a way of finding purpose in everything." "Sounds like a smart lady," She was. Earl nodded. Spent 38 years married to her before cancer took her 2 years ago. But even at the end, she was more worried about others than herself. Always writing letters to folks who needed encouragement, visiting prisoners. The clatter of Chase's fork hitting his plate cut through the air. Earl looked up to find the younger man staring at him with an odd expression. "Did you say letters to prisoners?" Earl nodded slowly. It was her ministry. She believed everyone deserved to know they mattered to somebody. Chase pushed up the sleeve of his t-shirt, revealing the inside of his forearm. Among the various tattoos, one stood out in simple black script. In memory of Lila W. Earl's own fork stopped mid-air, pancake forgotten. His throat went dry as he stared at the inscription. "There was this church lady," Chase said, his voice rough with emotion. "When I was 14 and in juvie, she wrote me letters. First person who ever..." He swallowed hard. "She didn't judge me or preach at me, just wrote about her garden and her faith and how she believed I could be more than my mistakes." His fingers traced the tattoo. Then one day the letters stopped. Found out later she'd kicked the bucket. Cancer. Earl's hands trembled as he set down his fork. "That was my wife," he whispered. The words hung in the sunlit kitchen. Chase's face went through a series of emotions: disbelief, recognition, something like awe. "No way," he breathed. "No way in hell." "She never told me names," Earl said, his voice thick with emotion. "Said it was between her and the people she wrote to. But she'd sit right there at this table, writing letters for hours. Sometimes she'd cry over the responses, especially from the young ones." Chase pushed back from the table and stood up, pacing the small kitchen. "This is crazy. What are the odds?" Earl rose slowly and walked to the window above the sink. The morning sun painted his small backyard in shades of gold, highlighting the flower beds Lila had loved so much. His mind spun with the revelation that this tattooed stranger, this man he'd pulled from a rain-soaked ditch, carried his wife's name on his skin, living proof that her quiet ministry had changed lives. He stared out at Lila's garden, where spring bulbs were just beginning to push through the soil. Like those persistent green shoots, something was growing in his heart, a sense that perhaps his own purpose wasn't finished after all. That maybe, just maybe, Lila's work wasn't done yet either. The silence in the kitchen held weight, filled with unspoken questions and possibilities. Earl stood at the window, watching the morning light paint shadows across the garden his wife had loved, feeling the gentle nudge of divine purpose in what he'd assumed would be his quiet final years. Earl's old pickup truck rattled down Main Street toward Johnson's grocery. His mind was still spinning from the morning's revelation, but practical matters needed attention. His pantry wasn't stocked for 2 people, and the young man needed clean clothes. The bell above Johnson's door chimed as Earl entered, grabbing a shopping cart. He'd barely made it 3 steps when Miss Hattie Caldwell's voice cut through the quiet store. "Earl Winston, I heard you missed your birthday dinner last night." She stood by the produce section, her perfectly styled gray hair unmoved by the ceiling fans. "We were all so worried." Earl managed a polite smile. "Good morning, Miss Hattie. Just picking up a few things." "A few things?" She raised an eyebrow at his cart. "And some extra clothes by the looks of it." She gestured to the pack of men's t-shirts and jeans he'd already grabbed from the small clothing section. "Just being prepared," Earl said vaguely, reaching for a loaf of bread. Miss Hattie sidled closer, lowering her voice. "Sarah Beth from the hospital called me this morning. Said she saw you there last night with some unsavory character." She emphasized the last words like they tasted bad. "A white man covered in tattoos?" Earl's shoulders tensed. In a town this size, news traveled faster than summer lightning. "That young man needed help, Miss Hattie. Nothing more to it than that." "Help?" Miss Hattie's eyes widened. "Earl Winston, you brought a criminal into your home? What would Lila say?" The mention of his wife's name made Earl straighten his spine. "My wife would say exactly what she always said. Judge not, lest you be judged." But Miss Hattie was already backing away, shaking her head. "I'll be praying for you, Earl. We all will." She hurried off toward the canned goods aisle, her whispered conversations with other shoppers following in her wake. Earl continued his shopping, trying to ignore the stares and whispers. He picked up extra toiletries, some basic first aid supplies, and enough food for several days. At the checkout, even Mary Beth, who'd known him for 20 years, seemed hesitant to meet his eyes. "You be careful now, Mr. Winston," she said softly as she bagged his groceries. The drive home was quiet, except for the rustle of grocery bags and the familiar creak of his truck's suspension. Earl found himself talking to Lila in his head, as he often did. "You knew about him all along, didn't you? Knew I'd need something to shake up my retirement?" When he pulled into his driveway, he noticed his garage door was open. The space, usually cluttered with his old carpentry tools and gardening equipment, looked different. Chase had obviously been busy. Tools were organized on the wall, the floor was swept clean, and the workbench was cleared off. Before Earl could fully appreciate the transformation, another car pulled in behind his truck. He recognized the sharp slam of the car door before he even turned around. Laverne was marching up his driveway, her nurse's scrubs still on from her shift, her face set in the expression he knew all too well. "Daddy," she called out, her voice carrying that careful control that meant she was furious. "Want to explain why you missed your birthday dinner? And why Sarah Beth called to tell me there's a strange man living in your house?" Earl set down his grocery bags. "Baby girl, I can explain." "Explain what?" Laverne's voice rose. "That you picked up some random criminal? That you're letting him stay here? Have you lost your mind?" The sound of footsteps made them both turn. Chase stood in the garage doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd showered and changed into Earl's old clothes, which were a bit too big on his lean frame. Despite his attempt at a polite smile, his discomfort was obvious. "Ma'am," he said quietly, nodding at Laverne. Laverne took a step back, her hand going to her throat. "Daddy, this is crazy. You don't know anything about this man." "Actually," Earl began, "there's something you need to know about Chase." "I don't need to know anything, except that he shouldn't be here." Laverne cut him off. "I'm not letting you throw your life away on some charity case who could kill you in your sleep." Chase's face hardened, but he stayed silent, his knuckles white on the rag he held. "Laverne," Earl said firmly, "that's enough. Chase is here because you're too kind for your own good." Laverne's eyes filled with tears. "Just like Mama was, always trying to save everybody, never thinking about herself. And look where that got her." The moment the words left her mouth, regret flashed across her face. Earl felt the sting of them, but kept his voice steady. "Your mama knew exactly what she was doing. Every life she touched was better for it." "This is a fool's way to die, Daddy," Laverne whispered. She turned and walked back to her car, wiping her eyes. Earl watched her drive away, his heart heavy. Behind him, he heard Chase clear his throat. "I should go," Chase said quietly. "I'm causing too much trouble." "No," Earl said, picking up his grocery bags. "You're right where you're supposed to be. Now help me get these groceries inside before the ice cream melts." That evening, Earl set the table for two, just as he had for breakfast. The meatloaf and potatoes filled the house with familiar smells, and for a moment, he could almost pretend it was just another normal day. But nothing was normal anymore. and maybe that was exactly what he needed. Chase appeared in the doorway as Earl bowed his head for grace. He stayed there, leaning against the frame, watching as Earl began to pray. "Lord," Earl said softly, "thank you for this food and the hands that prepared it. Watch over my daughter, Laverne. Help her understand that sometimes your plans don't make sense to us at first. And Lord, thank you for bringing Chase here. Whatever comes next, I trust you'll show us both the way. Amen." When Earl looked up, Chase hadn't moved from the doorway. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes had softened. "No one ever prayed for me before," Chase muttered, so quietly Earl almost missed it. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Earl gestured to the empty chair. "Well then," he said, "it's about time someone did. Come on, food's getting cold." The days settled into a gentle rhythm at Earl Winston's house on Oak Street. The morning sun would find Earl in his garden, tending to his tomatoes and okra, while the steady clinking of tools drifted from the garage where Chase worked on his motorcycle. It wasn't exactly peace, but it was something close to it. Earl noticed the pattern after the third day. Chase would disappear before dawn, saying he needed to clear his head. He'd return hours later with motorcycle parts that Earl knew cost more than a man without money could afford. New chrome pieces, fresh cables, specialty tools. Each time Chase would mutter something about getting a good deal, but Earl had lived long enough to know when something didn't add up. On the fourth morning, Earl woke earlier than usual. He watched through his kitchen window as Chase slipped out the garage side door, wearing work clothes instead of his usual motorcycle gear. Something wasn't right. "Lord," Earl whispered, grabbing his truck keys, "let me be wrong about this." He followed Chase's figure down Oak Street, keeping his distance. The morning fog hung low, making it easy to stay hidden. Chase walked with purpose, turning down Maple Avenue, then Cedar Lane. Earl's heart thumped harder with each turn, wondering if he'd find his trust betrayed. But Chase didn't head toward any store or shady meeting spot. Instead, he stopped at Miss Georgia's house, a small white cottage with peeling paint, where the elderly widow had lived alone since her husband passed 5 years ago. Earl parked across the street, watching as Chase knocked on her door. Miss Georgia appeared, her tiny frame dwarfed by Chase's tall figure. To Earl's surprise, she smiled and pointed toward her backyard. Chase followed her, disappearing behind the house. Earl waited 15 minutes before his curiosity got the better of him. He crossed the street, following the sound of hammering. When he rounded the corner, he stopped short at the sight. Chase was replacing boards in Miss Georgia's broken fence, working with the precision of someone who knew his way around tools. Miss Georgia sat in her porch rocker, watching him work while she shelled peas. "Morning, Earl," she called out cheerfully. "Your friend here is a blessing. Been fixing things all over the neighborhood this week. Won't take a penny for it either." Chase looked up, caught. A flush crept up his neck as he wiped sweat from his forehead. "It's nothing," he mumbled. "Just keeping busy." "Nothing?" Miss Georgia clicked her tongue. "He fixed Mrs. Patterson's screen door yesterday and helped Mr. Rodriguez with his car the day before. Been trading the work for parts from people's garages. Says he's saving up to make things right." Earl felt something in his chest loosen. Relief, pride, or maybe both. He walked over to where Chase stood, examining the fresh boards on the fence. "Nice work," he said softly. Chase shrugged, but Earl caught the slight upturn of his lips. "Learned carpentry in prison. Might as well use it for something good." That evening, Earl fried up catfish for dinner, his specialty, with cornmeal coating and just the right amount of seasoning. Chase sat at the kitchen table, watching him work. "So," Earl said, flipping a fillet, You planning to tell me about your morning business ventures?" Chase ducked his head, but there was a hint of a smile. "Figured you'd find out eventually. Wasn't trying to hide it exactly, just—" He paused, searching for words. "Didn't want you thinking I was trying to show off or something." "Show off by helping people?" Earl chuckled. "That's a new one." The laugh that escaped Chase seemed to surprise them both. Genuine, unguarded. Soon they were both laughing, the sound filling the kitchen like sunshine after rain. As they ate, the laughter faded into something more serious. Chase pushed his food around his plate, his expression growing distant. "I should tell you," he said finally, "about before, about why I ended up in jail." Earl set down his fork, giving Chase his full attention. "Only if you want to." Chase took a deep breath. "Was part of a motorcycle gang called the Steel Knights. Started young, 17, angry at the world. They became my family, or what I thought was family." He touched the faded tattoo on his forearm, next to Lila's name. "Did some bad things, ran protection rackets, fought rival gangs. One night, things went too far. A store owner wouldn't pay up, and Mason, one of our leaders, lost it. Started beating him. I tried to stop it, but—" He fell silent, lost in the memory. Earl waited patiently. "Guy ended up in the hospital. I turned state's evidence, testified against Mason and Trigger. Got 5 years instead of 15. Chase's voice grew bitter. "Gang marked me for death after that. Can't go back to my hometown now." "That's why you were so worried at the hospital," Earl said quietly. "About being recognized." Chase nodded. "Mason and Trigger got out last month. Been looking over my shoulder ever since." Earl absorbed this information, letting the silence stretch comfortable between them. Finally he spoke. "You know what I see when I look at you, Chase?" Chase tensed, waiting for judgment. "I see a man who chose right over easy, who's spending his mornings helping old ladies instead of hiding. You're not who you were yesterday, son. None of us are." The words seemed to hit Chase like a physical force. He pushed back from the table, walking to the screen door that led to the porch. Earl followed, settling into one of the 2 rocking chairs that had always been there, waiting. After a moment, Chase took the other chair. The sun was setting, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. Crickets began their evening song in the garden. "Maybe you're right," Chase said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. They sat together, watching the colors fade from the sky, 2 men carrying different pasts but sharing the same sunset. The evening wrapped around them like a comfortable blanket, full of possibility. Miss George's peas sat in a paper bag on the kitchen counter, her payment for the fence work. Tomorrow, Earl decided, he'd teach Chase how to make his mama's pea soup. But for now, this moment was enough. The Sunday morning sun painted Earl's kitchen in soft golden light as he adjusted his tie in the mirror. Behind him, Chase shifted uncomfortably in borrowed church clothes, a clean white shirt and dark slacks that Earl had kept from his son's college days. "You sure about this?" Chase tugged at his collar. The shirt strained slightly across his broader shoulders. "I mean, people talk enough already." Earl turned, his weathered hands smoothing his own jacket. "Been going to New Hope Baptist every Sunday for 43 years. Not about to stop now." He paused, studying Chase's nervous fidgeting. "And you're coming with me because everyone deserves grace, even if they don't think so themselves." The drive to church was quiet, broken only by the crunch of gravel under tires and the distant song of morning birds. Chase drummed his fingers against his knee, watching the familiar houses give way to the white-steepled building ahead. As they pulled into the parking lot, Earl noticed Chase's shoulders tense. Church members were already gathering on the steps, their Sunday best bright against the red brick walls. Miss Hattie's flowered hat turned sharply as she spotted Earl's truck, her whispered words spreading like ripples through the small crowd. "Head high now," Earl murmured, as they walked toward the entrance. "You've got as much right to be here as anyone." The whispers followed them inside. Earl felt rather than saw the subtle shifts. People choosing different pews, parents pulling children closer, purses clutched a little tighter. His usual greeting nods were met with stiff acknowledgments or averted eyes. They settled into Earl's regular spot, 5 rows from the front. Chase sat rigid, his tattooed hands clasped tightly in his lap. A young mother 2 rows ahead gathered her children and moved further forward, making no attempt to hide her reason. Brother Calvin Reed stood near the pulpit, his tall frame straight as an arrow, watching their entrance with narrowed eyes. The deacon's disapproval radiated across the sanctuary like heat waves. The service began with familiar rhythms, prayers, announcements, the collection plate. Earl noticed how Chase's eyes followed the movements of worship, taking in each ritual with careful attention. When the choir rose for their first hymn, something in Chase's expression softened. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound," the voices lifted in harmony. "That saved a wretch like me." Earl saw Chase's throat work, his jaw tightening against some emotion he wouldn't name. The words seemed to float in the air between the wooden beams, each verse carrying its own weight of meaning. As the morning progressed, the initial tension began to ease slightly. Some of the congregation, perhaps touched by the familiar messages of forgiveness and redemption, started throwing curious glances rather than fearful ones. A few even managed small smiles during the passing of peace. But when the choir stood for their final number, "His eye is on the sparrow," Chase abruptly pushed to his feet. "Need some air?" he whispered hoarsely, slipping past Earl and down the aisle. Several heads turned to watch his exit, and the whispers started fresh. Earl started to rise, but the music held him. The sweet, clear soprano lifted the familiar words. "I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free." Through the open doors, he could see Chase's silhouette on the steps, head bowed. He hadn't left completely, just moved to where he felt he belonged. The sight made Earl's heart ache. After the final "Amen," Earl made his way toward the doors, exchanging brief greetings with those brave enough to approach. He was almost outside when Brother Calvin's voice cut through the post-service chatter. "Brother Earl, a word, please." The deacon stood blocking the doorway, his face set in lines of stern disapproval. At 62, Calvin Reed carried himself with the rigid authority of a man who believed absolutely in his own righteousness. "Can't this wait, Calvin?" Earl asked quietly. "My friend's waiting." "That's precisely what we need to discuss." Calvin's voice dropped lower, though several nearby members leaned in to listen. "You're bringing shame to the house of God, Earl. That man, everyone knows what he is. What message are you sending to our young people? To the community?" Earl felt a familiar weariness settle in his bones, but his voice remained steady. "The same message that saved my life once. The same grace that found me when I came home from Vietnam, angry and lost." He met Calvin's gaze directly. "If grace only fits the clean, what's the point?" Color rose in Calvin's face. "There's a difference between grace and foolishness, between mercy and enabling sin." "Is there?" Earl asked simply. "Seems to me Jesus spent more time with sinners than saints." He stepped past the deacon, adding softly, "Good sermon today, Calvin, especially the part about loving our neighbors." Outside, Chase had moved to wait by the truck, his borrowed shirt already loosened at the collar. His eyes were red-rimmed, though he quickly looked away when Earl approached. Waste of time, Chase muttered as they drove home. They don't want someone like me there. Earl let the word sit for a moment before responding. Funny thing about want and need, they ain't always the same thing. Sometimes what we fight hardest against is exactly what we need most. Chase snorted, but didn't argue further. That evening, after a quiet dinner, Earl noticed Chase was missing from his usual spot on the porch. He found him in the garage, hunched over something in the weak light. It was one of the old pew benches from church, the one with the broken arm that had been pushed against the back wall for months. Chase's tools were spread around him as he carefully fitted a new piece of wood into place. Couldn't just leave it busted, he said without looking up, his hands steady on the repair. Figured since they got to put up with me, least I could do is fix what needs fixing. Earl watched silently as Chase worked, each movement precise and careful. The craftsmanship was good, better than good. But it was more than just skilled labor happening in that garage. With every measured cut and gentle sanding, something else was being rebuilt. A soft smile spread across Earl's face as he watched the transformation, not just of wood and nails, but of the man handling them. Something was shifting inside Chase, like ice breaking up on a river. Slow and subtle, but undeniable. Earl left him to his work, the sound of sandpaper following him back to the house. The evening crickets were starting their chorus, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called. Just another Sunday evening in Mississippi, except nothing was quite the same as it had been before. The attic steps creaked under Earl's feet as he made his way up, flashlight beam cutting through decades of dust. Behind him, Chase followed cautiously, ducking under the low beams. "You sure about this?" Chase asked, his voice unusually soft in the musty space. Earl nodded, moving toward a corner where cardboard boxes stood neatly stacked. "Been meaning to show you these for a while now." His old joints protested as he knelt, pulling out a weathered shoebox marked Prison Ministry in Lila's neat handwriting. Chase hung back, hands stuffed in his pockets. The morning light filtering through the small window caught the tension in his jaw. "Here they are," Earl said, lifting the lid. Inside, hundreds of letters lay bundled with faded ribbon, each stack carefully dated. Lila kept copies of every letter she sent, said it helped her remember who needed extra prayers. Chase's hands trembled slightly as he took the box, settling cross-legged on the dusty floor. Earl watched as the younger man's fingers traced over the familiar handwriting. "I kept everyone she sent me," Chase said quietly, pulling out a letter from 2008. "Until the guys in my block stole them, used them for cigarette paper." His voice caught. Never told her that part. Earl settled onto an old trunk, giving Chase space as he read through the letters. Sunlight crept across the attic floor as minutes ticked by, broken only by the occasional rustle of paper. "Remember, Chase," he read aloud from one letter, "your past might shape you, but it doesn't have to define you." I was 15 when she wrote this. He looked up at Earl, eyes bright. "Used to read it every night before lights out." Earl smiled softly. That was her way, finding the right words for hurting hearts. As Chase carefully returned the letters to their box, his gaze fell on something in the corner. Lila's old rocking chair, its arms split, and one runner cracked. Earl had meant to fix it countless times, but somehow never found the strength. Chase didn't say anything, but Earl noticed how his eyes lingered on the broken piece. The next morning, Earl heard hammering from the garage before dawn. The junkyard sprawled across 5 acres on the edge of town, a maze of rusty treasures and forgotten machinery. Earl led the way through narrow paths between stacked cars, Chase following with a list of parts they needed for his motorcycle. "Old Bobby keeps the bike parts back here," Earl explained, rounding a corner. Known him 40 years. He'll give us a fair price. Chase whistled at the collection of salvaged motorcycles. This is better than Christmas. They spent hours picking through parts, Chase's expert eye identifying what could be salvaged. Earl watched him work, impressed by his knowledge and care. Learned mechanics in prison, Chase explained, testing a timing belt. Better than sitting in a cell counting cockroaches. As the afternoon heat built, they took breaks in the shade of an old delivery truck, sharing Earl's Thermosoft ice water. The stories came easier then, memories flowing like the sweat on their brows. Remember this one night in Nam, Earl began, his voice distant. Monsoon season, water up to our knees in the jungle. Couldn't tell the rain from the bullets. Chase listened intently as Earl spoke of fear and faith, of finding humanity in the darkest places. In return, he shared his own stories, surviving foster homes, street fights, the choices that led him to the gang. Funny thing is, Chase said, wiping grease from his hands, I thought they were family. Closest thing I had, anyway, till they set me up to take a fall for them. Earl nodded slowly. Family ain't always blood. Sometimes it's who God puts in your path when you need them most. They worked through the afternoon, piecing the motorcycle back together like a complex puzzle. Chase's hands moved with surprising gentleness over the engine parts, treating each component with respect. My daddy used to say, Earl offered, holding a light while Chase adjusted the carburetor, that machines are like people. Treat them rough, they'll fight you back. Treat them with care. They'll take care of you, Chase finished, nodding. Smart man, your daddy. The sun was setting when they finally had everything assembled. Chase stood back, wiping his hands on a rag, studying their work. Moment of truth, he said, swinging his leg over the seat. His hand hesitated over the starter, then caught Earl's encouraging nod. The engine turned once, twice, then roared to life with a deep, healthy rumble. Chase's face lit up with pure joy, years falling away from his features as he revved the engine. Listen to that, he shouted over the sound, grinning like a boy on Christmas morning. She's breathing again, old man. Earl couldn't help but smile at Chase's enthusiasm. In that moment, he didn't see the tattoos or the scars or the years of hard living. He saw something new being born, or maybe something old being restored, like the machine beneath him. The engine's purr echoed off the garage walls as the day's last light painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. It was a good sound, the sound of something broken being made whole again. Through the open garage door, Earl caught a glimpse of Chase's latest project, Lila's rocking chair carefully dismantled on his workbench. The broken pieces lay arranged with purpose, waiting to be renewed, just like the motorcycle, just like the man himself. Chase cut the engine, the sudden silence filled with possibility. We did good work today, he said simply, patting the bike's tank with obvious pride. Earl nodded, knowing they weren't just talking about the motorcycle anymore. Some repairs went deeper than metal and wood, right down to the soul itself. They stood together in the growing dusk, surrounded by tools and parts and the lingering warmth of honest work. Neither felt the need to say more. Sometimes the best conversations happened in silence, in the space between words where understanding grew like evening shadows. The kitchen clock ticked past 9 o'clock when the first rumble of motorcycles broke the evening quiet. Earl was washing dishes, his hands deep in soapy water, while Chase sat at the kitchen table fixing a broken toaster. The sound made Chase freeze, the screwdriver slipping from his grip. No, he whispered, his face draining of color. Not here. Earl dried his hands slowly, watching through the window as 2 motorcycles pulled into his gravel driveway, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The riders wore leather jackets with faded patches, wolves' heads snarling against a blood-red background. "Friends of yours?" Earl asked quietly, though he already knew the answer. Chase stood up so fast his chair toppled backward. "Earl, get in the bedroom and lock the door. These men, they're not here to talk." A heavy fist pounded on the front door. "Rollins, get your sorry behind out here." Earl straightened his shoulders, memories of other dark nights and other threats rising in his mind. He'd faced worse in Vietnam. Much worse. "Stay here," Earl said, his voice carrying the calm authority that had once steadied young soldiers in the jungle. "Earl, please," Chase pleaded. "You don't know what they're capable of." "Neither do they." Earl adjusted his glasses and walked to the front door. Behind him, Chase cursed under his breath. The porch light illuminated two men, one tall and lean with a scraggly beard, the other shorter, but built like a bull. Their leather jackets carried the musty smell of cigarettes and old beer. "Evening, gentlemen," Earl said, standing in the doorway. "Bit late for social calls." The taller one, Mason, Chase had called him, sneered. "Where's Rollins hiding, old-timer? Boy owes us money." "That right?" Earl's voice remained steady. "Seems to me Chase has been working honest these days." The shorter one, they called him Trigger, stepped forward, his boots heavy on Earl's porch. "Ain't about honest work. It's about loyalty, about family." "Some family," Chase's voice came from behind Earl. He stepped onto the porch, his jaw tight. "Setting me up to take the fall while you two walked free." Mason's face darkened. "You knew the rules, brother. Someone had to take the heat." "And now someone's got to pay," Trigger added, cracking his knuckles. Earl didn't move from his spot between them. "Not here. Not tonight. This is my home, and you're not welcome." Mason laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Look at this, Trigger. The old man's got some fire." He leaned in close to Earl's face. "Listen good, Grandpa. Chase owes us $15,000. That's how much we lost when he rolled over on our operation." "I did my time," Chase growled. 3 years while you two ran free. Debt's paid." "That ain't how we see it." Trigger pulled out a cigarette, lighting it with deliberate slowness. "We'll be back. And if you're still harboring our friend here..." He blew smoke in Earl's face. "Well, let's just say fire has a way of cleaning house." Earl didn't flinch from the smoke. "You threatening me, son?" "Just stating facts." Mason stepped back, grinning. "Think about it, Chase. You really want to drag this nice old man down with you?" The bikers mounted their motorcycles, engines roaring to life. Mason called over his shoulder, 24 hours, brother, then everything burns." They peeled out of the driveway, gravel spraying. The sound of their bikes faded into the night, leaving behind a heavy silence. Earl closed the door quietly, turning to find Chase already heading upstairs. "Where you going?" "Getting my stuff." Chase's voice was tight with anger and fear. "I never should have stayed this long. Never should have put you in danger." Earl followed him up to the spare room, watching as Chase threw clothes into his old backpack. His hands were shaking. "Running never fixed a thing," Earl said softly. "No?" Chase whirled around. "Tell that to your burning house when they come back. Tell that to your daughter when she finds out her daddy got hurt because of me." His voice cracked. "I'm poison, Earl. Everything I touch goes bad." Earl stepped into the room, picking up a shirt Chase had dropped. "That what Lila thought when she wrote to you?" Chase stopped packing, his shoulders slumping. "That was different. She was hope. I'm just trouble." "Maybe," Earl agreed, sitting on the bed. "Or maybe you're at that crossroads she always wrote about, the place where a man decides who he really is." "I know who I am." "Do you?" Earl folded the shirt carefully. Because I see a man who's been fixing things, helping neighbors, working honest. Seems to me that's who you are now." Chase sank onto the bed beside Earl, head in his hands. "I'm scared, Earl. Not for me, for you. They'll do it, you know. They'll burn everything. Then maybe it's time to stand." Earl placed a hand on Chase's shoulder. "Time to face it, whatever comes." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of decision heavy in the air. Finally, Chase whispered, "I don't know how." "We can start with prayer," Earl said simply. Chase looked up, surprise crossing his features. I haven't prayed since juvie, since Lila's letters. No time like the present." Earl bowed his head. After a hesitation, Chase did the same. "Lord," Earl began, his voice gentle but firm, "we need your strength tonight. Chase here's trying to walk a better path, but the old road's calling. Give him courage to stand. Give us both wisdom to face what's coming." Chase's voice joined in, rough and uncertain. "God, if you're listening, I'm sorry. For everything. Just don't let Earl pay for my mistakes. Please." "Amen," Earl finished softly. When they raised their heads, something had shifted in the room. The fear wasn't gone, but it had changed shape, become something they could face together. Chase stood slowly, picked up his backpack, and after a long moment, set it back down. "I'll stay," he said quietly. "But we need a plan." Earl nodded, rising to his feet. "First things first." He walked downstairs to the front door, checking each lock carefully. The night pressed against the windows, full of shadows and threats, but inside, two men prepared to face whatever morning would bring. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, counting down the hours until dawn, until choices would have to be made and consequences faced. But for now, in the quiet house, a trembling peace held, the kind that comes not from safety, but from finally choosing to stop running. The night was deep and still when Earl jerked awake to the sound of shouting. Through his window, an orange glow painted the sky, and smoke curled beneath his door. His heart lurched as he heard Chase yelling from outside. "Earl! Fire! The garage is burning!" Earl grabbed his robe and rushed downstairs, his old knees protesting. The heat hit him before he even opened the door, waves of it rolling from the garage where flames licked up the walls. Chase was already there with the garden hose, face streaked with soot. "Called 911!" Chase shouted over the roar of flames. "Grab the other hose!" Earl's hands shook as he connected the second hose to the spigot. Together they fought the fire, steam hissing where water met flame. The crackle of burning wood filled the air, along with thick smoke that made Earl's eyes water and his lungs burn. "The wind's pushing it toward the house," Chase coughed, adjusting his aim. Earl could hear sirens in the distance, growing closer. Already neighbors were emerging from their homes, some in pajamas, others fully dressed as if they'd been waiting for disaster. Their faces glowed orange in the firelight, whispering and pointing. The fire truck arrived with a wail, followed by 2 police cars. Firefighters took over, their powerful hoses making Earl's garden hose look like a child's toy. The garage was already half gone, but they managed to keep the flames from reaching the house. Sheriff Thompson stepped out of his cruiser, his weathered face grim. He'd known Earl for 30 years, but tonight his eyes were cold with suspicion. "Want to explain what happened here, Earl?" Before Earl could answer, Chase stepped forward. "It wasn't him. This is my fault. Some guys I used to know." "Used to know?" The sheriff cut him off. "You mean your gang buddies? The ones witnesses saw riding through town earlier?" Chase's jaw tightened. "I'm not with them anymore." "Sure about that?" Thompson moved closer, his hand resting on his belt. Because this looks an awful lot like gang retaliation, and you're the only gang member I see." "He's not lying," Earl said firmly. "Chase tried to stop this." "Earl." Thompson's voice softened with false patience. "I respect you. But harboring a criminal? That's not like you." The crowd had grown larger. Miss Hattie stood at the front, her phone recording everything. Other faces Earl had known for decades now looked at him with mixture of pity and judgment. A car door slammed. Laverne rushed forward, still in her nurse's scrubs. "Daddy, are you okay?" She grabbed his arms, checking him for injuries. Then she whirled on Chase. "I knew this would happen! I told you he was dangerous!" "Laverne, please!" Earl started. "No!" She was crying now. "You have to stop this! Stop protecting criminals who don't care if they get you killed!" Chase stood very still, smoke swirling around him. His face had gone blank, but Earl could see the hurt in his eyes. "Your daughter's right," Thompson said. "This man's brought nothing but trouble." Earl looked at the ruined garage, at the frightened faces of his neighbors, at his daughter's tears. The weight of it all pressed down on his shoulders. He felt every one of his 75 years. "Chase," he said quietly, Maybe it's best if you go." Chase nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting this. "Yeah, guess I burned my last bridge." He walked to his half-fixed motorcycle, the one they'd spent weeks working on together. It started with a rough cough. Earl wanted to say more, about forgiveness, about not giving up. But the words stuck in his throat as Chase kicked the bike into gear. Without looking back, Chase rode away into the darkness. The sound of his motorcycle faded into the distance as the first drops of rain began to fall. The crowd dispersed slowly. The firefighters packed up their gear. Thompson gave Earl one last disapproving look before driving away. Finally, only Laverne remained. "Come stay with me tonight, Daddy," she pleaded. Earl shook his head. "I need to be home." She hugged him tightly before leaving, and then Earl was alone. He stood on his porch, watching the rain wash away the smoke. Tears rolled down his weathered cheeks, hidden by the falling water. "Lord," he whispered into the darkness, "I tried." The rain fell harder, drumming on what remained of the garage roof. Earl stayed there a long time, remembering the sound of laughter as they'd worked on that motorcycle, the quiet conversations over coffee, the small steps toward redemption that now seemed washed away like footprints in the storm. The smell of smoke lingered in Earl's home like an unwelcome guest. Even after 3 thorough cleanings, it clung to the curtains and seeped from the walls, a constant reminder of that terrible night. The scorch marks on the living room wall stood out like dark accusations against the pale paint. Each Sunday, Earl took his usual place in the third pew, but the familiar comfort of worship felt different now. He could feel the stairs boring into his back, hear the whispers that fell silent when he turned around. Even Brother Calvin, who'd once sought Earl's counsel, now gave only stiff nods in passing. The cemetery became his refuge in the afternoons. Earl would sit beside Lila's headstone for hours, tending the flowers and talking softly to her as clouds drifted overhead. "Did I fail him, Lila?" he'd ask, running his weathered hand over her name. "Was I wrong to believe people could change?" Only the wind answered, rustling through the oak trees. Rumors traveled fast in their small town. Miss Hattie made sure everyone heard how Chase had been spotted with his old gang members 2 counties over. Each new story twisted the knife deeper in Earl's heart. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange, Laverne's car pulled into the driveway. She carried 2 bags of groceries up to the porch, her steps hesitant. "Daddy," she said softly, setting the bags down. "I've been thinking about how I acted that night. I was scared for you, but I was wrong to yell like that." Earl helped her unpack the groceries, their movements careful around each other. "I miss how you used to be," Laverne continued, putting away cans of soup. "The way your eyes lit up when you believed in someone. You taught me that's what faith looks like." They hugged, a proper embrace that felt like coming home. As she gathered her purse to leave, she pulled something from her pocket, a folded church bulletin. "Look at the back," she said quietly. Earl unfolded it, and his heart skipped. There was Chase, captured in black and white newsprint, but transformed. He stood in a clean workshop, teaching teenagers about engines. His smile was genuine, reaching his eyes. The article described a new charity program helping at-risk youth learn mechanical skills. Earl's fingers traced the photo, feeling hope flutter in his chest like a newly freed bird. The morning sun glinted off the auto shop's weathered sign as Earl pulled into the graveled lot. His old truck creaked to a stop between neat rows of cars waiting for repair. Through the open bay door, he spotted Chase in dark blue coveralls, methodically wiping grease from his hands with a red shop rag. Chase froze when he saw Earl, the rag dropping from his fingers. "Earl?" His voice cracked slightly. "Thought I'd stop by?" Earl said softly, stepping into the cool shade of the garage. Chase's eyes dropped to the floor. "I turned them in," he said quietly. "Mason, Trigger, the whole operation. Gave the police everything they needed. Had to make it right, after what they did to your place." Earl nodded slowly, taking in the clean workshop, the orderly tools, the respect in other workers' greetings as they passed. Chase reached into his pocket, pulled out an envelope. "Been saving up, too. Pay you back for everything." Earl pushed the envelope away gently. Instead, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Chase. The younger man stood stiff for a moment, then melted into the embrace, his shoulders shaking slightly. "Come home for dinner," Earl said when they finally stepped apart. Chase wiped his eyes quickly. "You sure? After everything?" "Family's never about blood," Earl said simply. That evening, the house filled with the smell of fried chicken and the sound of genuine laughter. Over dinner, they talked easily, like the painful separation had never happened. When night fell, Earl's prayer rose clear and grateful. "Thank you, Lord, for unfinished stories finding their endings." 4 weeks later, the First Baptist Church of Laurel Bend buzzed with excitement. Colorful balloons bobbed against the ceiling, and long tables groaned under the weight of casseroles, pies, and Miss Hattie's famous potato salad. The whole community had gathered to properly celebrate Earl Winston's 76th birthday. Chase shifted uncomfortably in his borrowed suit, tugging at the slightly too tight collar as he sat beside Laverne and her children. His weathered hands fidgeted with the carefully wrapped gift in his lap. Brother Calvin approached their pew, his steps measured but determined. The church grew quiet, watching. Calvin extended his hand to Chase, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. Their handshake, firm and genuine, brought tears to Earl's eyes. During the potluck dinner, Chase stood nervously, presenting Earl with 2 gifts. The first was Lila's rocking chair, lovingly restored to its former glory, every scratch buffed away, and the wood gleaming like new. The second was a small envelope containing Lila's church letter, now beautifully framed, the very one that had changed his life years ago. The choir, led by Sister Martha, began the first notes of Amazing Grace. Earl's gaze swept across the room, from Chase's proud smile to Laverne's tears, from the forgiving faces of his congregation to the restored chair that held so many memories. As he leaned forward to blow out his candle, Earl whispered, "He missed one dinner but found a miracle." Later that evening, Earl settled into Lila's rocking chair by the window. The gentle creak of wood matched the rhythm of his contentment as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, a motorcycle engine rumbled, then faded away, like a prayer carried on the evening breeze. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.